Or you could come in by airplane. We could fly you in, or you could fly your own airplane in. You could come in by motorcade, or also by boat. All those were available for you. Now, usually you'd be greeted here at the south side of the complex by either Mr. Hearst or Miss Davies' secretaries, or perhaps the housekeeper. And your luggage would be brought to one of the rooms wherever you're going to stay, or what's going to be assigned to you. And you'd also read out some special rules for you. Mr. Hearst's rules were that one thing is that he didn't tolerate no cohabitation between members of the opposite sex unless you're married, and certainly no excessive drinking, because drunkenness was not tolerated. The social obligation you had was that you were to come to the main house around 7 o'clock at night, and then finally go in and have dinner with everyone else around 9 o'clock at night. Now, can you imagine approaching this house late at night? You just come in from your train has brought you to San Luis Obispo, and it might be 2 in the morning, so the cab or Mr. Hearst's motorcade might bring you the next 50 rugged miles up here. And this entire complex is all ablaze in lights. It looks like a birthday cake up in the sky. In fact, one little boy coming through said, I'd start singing Happy Birthday, because that's what it reminded me. So anyway, after you've been given the rules, and then you're available to do anything you want here. He has pools for you to go to. He has tennis courts. House of the Mountains, Casa del Sol facing the west, the setting sun, and Casa del Mar facing south toward the ocean. Casa del Sol has a Moorish design to it, a Moorish feel. The others have a Renaissance. Actor Bob Hope and his wife Dolores stayed here. You might remember the song Thanks for the Memories. That's iconic of Mr. Hope. And this was also at one time going to be known as a bougainvillea house because of the intense flowering that we see around it. Facing the view. Now, during the good months, the summer months, guests would be invited out here into the cottages. And if it was stormy out, then you would be brought into the main house to be close by. And speaking of a storm, one winter in the early 30s, they had snow here. And you know who the Marx brothers are, perhaps. Well, Harpo Marx, the one that doesn't say anything but honks the horn, he was a guest here, and him and Marion Davies' nephew were sitting up in the library up there, and they noticed the snow falling on the statuary. And they had the brilliant idea. They went around and gathered 10 fur coats from their guests that were here, the ladies. They ran around here at night and put the fur coats on the, as he says, the naked broads in the statuary here. And they went to bed very pleased with themselves, thinking they'd got a gallant deed. So they wake up in the morning, and they see the snow sitting on top of the fur coats, which are on top of the statuary. This didn't go over well with Mr. Hearst. He didn't think this was so funny, and as such, they didn't repeat that again.
Drivers to drive crazy because they think they're in the safest car. Oops, sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
You come forward just a little bit later, but I didn't realize there was all that. Okay, so this was meant to be the Hearst family home. Okay, this was completed in the early 1920s, and the Hearst family stayed here until about 1927. This is the largest and most complex of the rooms, of the buildings. This is 3 stories in height. It's 5,300 feet, and there's 18 rooms here. And Mr. Hearst, his suite was to the south, separate from the ladies' suite, which is over here. And he said, the ladies should have the fussy things that ladies like, and him not having such a fussy thing. One of the things was increased storage. So as we go through here to the bathroom, take a look in the shower. This is a 1920 shower with 7 shower heads.
Wow. Good stuff. Is this the ladies' room?
Mr. Hearst married his wife, Millicent Veronica Wilson, in 1993.
I love this one. I've seen this one before. Charlotte's everywhere.
Yeah, this is
And 5
nice.
sons in 1904 and 1950. and the last two were twins. Those 5 boys grew up and had 16 marriages among them. Now, in 1950, Mr. Hearst met a teenager who was with the Ziegfeld Follies. Her name was Marion Davies, and he was in his early 50s. This started a romantic relationship that went on for about 30 years. This didn't go over so well with Mrs. Hearst. And in the mid-1920s, they separated, and she took the teenage boys back to their estates in New York, with her back toward this side of the country, and Miss Davies became the occupant here. She is the hostess. Sir Winston Churchill, who met both ladies independently, said, you know, Mr. Hearst has 2 charming wives. I guess that was one way to look at it. But Mr. Hearst and his wife carried on 2 very productive and separate lives. In about 1936, I guess, Mr. Shaw was an Irish playwright. He's penned over 60 plays in his life. One of them was Pygmalion, which becomes My Fair Lady. He received the 1925 Nobel Prize for Literature, and also he received an Oscar for the screenplay. And he's the only person in existence to have both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar at the same time. Well, Mr. Shaw and his wife were guests here. They flew in on their own Stinson aircraft and landed here out in the Mr. Hearst runway. Mr. Shaw said, you know, couldn't understand why Americans just didn't worship Mr. Hearst. He has everything that Americans adore. He said, you know, he had some money, he had some power, reasonably good looks, a beautiful girl, talking about Miss Davies, and a wife who let him get away with it. Our docents here, they're very dapper. In fact, in the 1930s, styles were gauged more by what they saw in the movies rather than what Paris, France was creating. And Mr. Shaw also made the observation, said that fashion is just an induced epidemic. And so we don't want to catch any contagious style here, so perhaps we'll go on now to the cocktail hour in the main house and take in a couple shots just as a preventative measure. Protects the god of sun in Egypt. And of course the sun is down now, so I think she's off duty, so I think we might be able to get by and not catch her wrath at that point. Now when you think about the stars above you, Sir Edwin Hubble, of the astronomer, you've heard of the Hubble Space Telescope, he was a guest here. And I think he would be coming by here and enjoying this whole place. In fact, Hearst was thinking about putting an observatory over there on Reservoir Hill, but never got around to that.
Oh, nice.
Fountains there, perhaps an occasional cricket, frog or two. The fish are looking at us from the lily ponds at the very bottom. And the little gangway you see here was for Mr. Hearst's dachshunds. He had over 50 dachshunds, and that was to help them escape the perils of the pond. Now in the summer, the cocktail hour might be extended out here, and for everybody's enjoyment. It's a good place to do that. But when it got a little chilly, the party would continue on the other side of that 16th century Spanish monastery gate from Seville. Go in and see join the party. This is a social room for the socializing in the 1930s. Typically, the original poker table here, for instance, this reminds me of a very famous tennis star, Alice Marble. She was a guest here, and she was asked to sit in for one of Mr. Hearst's newspaper publishers. And he said, well, we'll split whatever you win in the morning and cover each other's losses. So she went ahead and joined him, and she had photographic memory, and she promptly won $1,200 at that table. And at the end of the evening, the other guests were going to start making out checks for her, and she said, no, I can't do it. Her conscience bothered her. She said her mother would kill her if she found out that she was gambling. So she declined that. And the next day, Mr. Hearst was kind of curious about this, and she explained what he was meaning. He understood stores throughout California, so Mr. Hearst was If you look at this floor, this is a teak wood floor, but it's also an engineered dance surface. It's got this coffered surface to it. So they used to push the furniture out of the way and roll up the carpets and have an orchestra over there, and you'd be dancing here. This was a good gig, as they say, for a musician. You'd get $40 for the weekend to play over there, and I thought this was pretty neat. Now, the kind of dances they might do here was the swing was very popular, the Lindy Hop, named after Charles Lindbergh, and that was a swing with some aerials, and also the Charleston. And Mr. Hearst was good at the Charleston. Well, he liked the Charleston. They said he had the grace of an elephant, but he had the dignity of one, so it was sort of a sideways compliment in that regard. He also liked country western, and he provided these songs in 5 years. He particularly liked this song. Now, one of their lead singers was a gentleman named Leonard Slide. You might know him as Roy Rogers. That's who he becomes. And anyway, so he'd asked them to play that over and over again, tumbling, tumbling. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. It's time for dinner. Let's tumble. Now, this is the refectory. The refectory is a large dining hall found in the monastery college. As the guests come in, they're in awe of the Gothic romance. We're talking about Gothic, we're talking about the 12th century, we're talking about medieval times. We have increased height, increased light, increased magic, and all the elements around it. If you think about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, well, this table's not round, it's a 17th century Italian monastery. And although it's a very grand place, you look at the surface, it's considered fine, ranch style comfort. And notice, although you have the rule of England table sets here, you have simple condiments like ketchup and mustard here. And that reminded us of the simple days when we came up here and stayed in the tent as a young man. And one of the butlers said, Mr. Hearst came before ketchup on almost everything he ate. Now, Hearst has his able to produce most everything they needed here. A sample or menu, perhaps, in 1934, they had started out with lentil soup, followed by roasted green neck pheasant, buttered green string beans, mashed potatoes and gravy, and apricot tart. The movie that night is, it happened one night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. And that swept 1934 Oscars with Best Movie, Best Direction, Best Actor and Actress. And both Colbert and Clark Gable were guests here on Home of the Night.
Yeah, I did.
It's okay. Can't have everything. Up here?
Now, this is the morning room, and it was named as such because the sun rises in the morning and fills it with light. Ironically, though, it's used morning, evening after dinner. And it's also Grand Central Station. This connects the service wing with the entertainment wing over there to the main wing, which we just came out of. And you could expect the guests to be here around the table in the evening, enjoying some conversation. There was also smoking room. In the 20s and 30s, it was advertised that smoking enhanced digestion and increased lung capacity. There were even ads of where doctors recommended certain brands. They were a little wrong on that, but you could expect the guests to be here. There might be a cup there filled with cigarettes, and everybody's partaking in that. And of course, the smoke from that and the smoke from the fireplace ended up damaging the 16th century Spanish ceiling overhead. Now, that teaware there, that's Booth of England, and that reminds me that Sir Thomas Lipton of Lipton tea fame was a guest here. And it was the 1930s when the tea bag was invented for the first time. And also the song of the hour of that time was Tea for Two by Art Tatum. Now this is the pantry and the kitchen. This is state-of-the-art 1920s, 1930s. Mr. Hearst was very much into technological things, a lot of the latest and greatest and everything. For instance, the refrigerators you see here, these are Frigidaires. Frigidaire is the pioneer in development of the electric refrigerator and the icebox. And you've heard the term, I'm going to the fridge. It means I'm going to the Frigidaire. That's where that term comes from. Now they also have they had 4 refrigerators here, including one back there in where the guests or the staff stays. And the electrician here, Byron Hanchett, said that they used to go to their refrigerator about twice a day because they get the leftover food that the kitchen produced. And they said they'd go and pull a half a chicken out of there and a whole pie. And they said after 2 years of doing this, we got so fat, him and his partner, they had to bend over and tie each other's shoes. They couldn't do their own shoes. Now, this is a pretty self-sufficient place. I mean, Mr. Hearst had 6 to 9 service staff here in the kitchen, and they were able to produce all their own milk. They had 100 cows that they milked twice a week. And they had
Like a kitchen like this.
One day, Big Crosby was here, and he wanted to see the dairy operation. So they called the dairyman down to the dairy barn and said, that gentleman's coming down to motorcade. Well, he gets out of the car, and they invite him into the milking parlor, and he wanted to see how things were going. They showed him. Then they said a lady wants to come down and see him. Well, this is actress Carol Lombard. She comes down in the motorcade, she gets out, and the dairyman noticed she has a very strong perfume. And they were very surprised by this. When they pulled her into the parlor, it got the cows so excited, none of them would let down any milk. So they had to ask Miss Lombard to leave so they could continue their milking process. Now, Mr. Hearst liked something very interesting. It was called Welsh rarebit. And Welsh rarebit is toast with melted cheese and egg and beer. And it also had some mustard and spices. Well, he used to come down here after the movie and make it for himself and make it for his guests. He was quite prized in that regard. By the way, this surface of this table, this is interesting. These are warming tables. These have water pipes underneath them that heat the surface so they can prepare food. And this is technologically advanced. This is Monel. Monel is an alloy that is 2/3 nickel and 1/3 copper with some manganese. And it's stronger than steel and more rust resistant than stainless steel. But in the 1920s and 1930s, this was very popular. It's so expensive nowadays, it's been replaced by stainless steel. So, now Mr. Hearst had a rule about the liquor. He said after 1 o'clock in the morning, no more hard liquor, no more wine. But beer was okay. If you look at his physique, you might get the idea that he had a little, enjoyed some beer. And of course, wasn't it Benjamin Franklin said that beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy? And I think the Beer Barrel Polka was a very famous song at that particular time.
So how much of a staff did you?
Well, usually it was maybe 20, 25, 30 people, not including all the ranch hands that are out there, because he had, 250,000 acres around us. But usually he'd bring in extra people if it was like a large party. For instance, he had a very large birthday party for his 71st birthday. He had 100 people here as guests, so he'd bring in additional staff at that time. But this was a pretty efficiently run place. Not too much of a problem at all. And now they so they subdivided him out, and these became double occupancy rooms with 2 bathrooms each. Now, the type of folks that stayed here, unmarried starlings, the great traveling companions, relatives. Mr. Hearst went to one of the cottages at Casa del Mar to stay there. Remember, Mr. Hearst did like cohabitation in that regard. Now, at the time of Hearst, there was no windows here, and this slanted floor, this is Hotel Rain. In 1927, they had a very serious storm here that drove a lot of water and dampness into these rooms. So Hearst ended up putting up some storm shelters to protect it. But at the time, in the 30s, if you were uncomfortable here, and this castle is easier to keep cool because of the cross ventilation, but it's very hard to keep warm. You only have fireplaces and have large wall here. So one of the places you go for refuge is the library itself. And there it's kind of warm and cozy. It's more than just This elevator, it's one of the two elevators in the building. And Otis is the one that invented the elevator. Well, one of the stories is President Calvin Coolidge and his wife Grace were guests here just after he got out of office. And his wife was in there and she got stuck. And she thought that somebody would eventually notice she was missing, but nobody came for her. So she has two things going for her. One is she had knitting and she could yodel. And so she's in there knitting and yodeling, and after about a half hour, a voice rings out, says, "Is somebody down there?" She said, "Oh, my liberator, I've been freed." Anyway, they got her out, and after that, Mr. Hearst had a alarm set in there because it's rather embarrassing to have the First Lady of the United States stuck in your elevator. And he got original papers from George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. He got original letters from all the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There's classical pieces in here from Dickens as Ground Zero, William Randolph Hearst Incorporated. Think of this as a man cave for workaholic. Think of this as a corporate boardroom. On the far side there, you'll see Mr. Hearst at age 31. He's overlooking his domain. And his domain is actually an empire. He has over 94 diverse businesses throughout the world. These are forestry, paper pulp production, mining interests, agriculture, chicory production, numerous things. Plus he has the largest media empire in existence. He has over 28 newspapers, 13 magazines, 8 radio stations. He has a motion picture company called Cosmopolitan. And he has a television station. In the early 30s, he's employing over 31,000 people, arguably more than Ford Motor Company. And they said that 1 in 4 Americans were exposed to his media empire. He had the ability to create and shift public opinion. He has been accused of creating the furor that led to the Spanish-American War in 1898. Apparently he did. At least he had the ability to do that. And you know, he wanted to be able to run his empire from here, not have to be in New York the way all his contemporaries were. So he had over 100 telephones installed on his hilltop. He put in a switchboard with 3 operators working round the clock. He had telegraph and teletype capabilities here. And what he would do usually after the movie, late at night, he'd say, "I'm coming upstairs, I'm going to put my babies to bed." Well, that meant he was going to put his empire to bed. Where there was a Italian choir stall here, there's a panel that opens up, so we come down through this elevator that opens up something that we get to see. Yeah.
Unlike the Winchester Mystery House on
Yeah.
the Gears.
Yeah, that one, people get spooked in there when they go in there. So these are the other side of the cloisters, and on the other side you saw those windows there. That was put in by the state because the heavy rains come from the south, but this is what it was meant to be. It was meant to be open like this, and it had a lot of air going through, a lot of cross ventilation, very comfortable. Again, the so-called castle is easy to keep cool because these walls are anywhere from 18 to 24 inches thick, depending on where you are. But it's more difficult to keep it warm because you had the fireplaces. He has 30 fireplaces here, and you had little electric wall heaters, and that was the main source of heat at that time. But
About 40 steps up.
Persian tiles, perhaps?
Persian
Spanish?
We're here in the pool
Well,
room.
yeah, there's all kinds of things here. There's bathrooms above us. There's 115 rooms here.
We're trying to figure out what was in the hall.
Apparently, he must have one lot. Yes, he's Okay, this is the billiard room. Now, you have pocket billiards. This one's different. There are no pockets to it. This is French billiards or carom billiards. And the object here was to strike the ball, bank it off the side, and hit the other 2 balls in succession to gain a point. Now, Mr. Hearst played pool, and he would challenge some of his guests to games. He said he was fairly good at it. The interesting thing here is both men and women played in this room. At that time, in the East Coast, it was different. Ladies did not typically play pool, and they certainly didn't play with men. But here on the West Coast, they didn't have that problem. So both ladies and men would be here, which would shock some of the folks from back east. They say, whoa, this is different. Now, this entire room talks about a gaming theme. If you look at the 15th century Spanish ceiling overhead, this is the playland of the Spanish 500 years ago. And those cross beams show what they did there. They did horse races, they did jousting, they did bullfighting, bear baiting, and that's where they tie a bear down, and then engage it with the dogs and contestants. Not the kind of thing you do today, but back then it did. This 500-year-old tapestry here is Franco-Flemish in origin. It's called the stag hunt. And you can see the nobleman chasing the stag through the forest. And the Persian tiles that they have all through here, this is from the Qajar dynasty. This shows the Shah and Empress being entertained by musicians and dancers and everything in that regard. Now, this is also a time of the radio. In 1933, about 60% of American households had a radio. Now, we're about 250 miles away from the closest radio transmitter in the 1930s. Mr. Hearst owns 8 radio stations throughout the country. So he has a special radio device. This is an RCA Victor R74. It has push buttons on it. And those push buttons are connected to receivers that are in the basement. He had instructions to his service staff to pick up the mouse and take them outside. Now, if you were a rat, you were supposed to be disposed of, but the mice would be taken outside. Now, what happened one evening is my favorite pet dachshund, Helen, was there, and in front of everybody, all of a sudden, Helen ate one of the mice. And Mr. Hearst was quite upset about that, not so much at Helen, but about the other guests. She said, how could you let this happen, to him? And all the guests just dropped their mouths open. They didn't know what to say about this. It was quite interesting in that regard. So he had a very tender heart for that.
I was just fielding questions, so I'm so glad you told that story. We always have to. She was a smart real estate woman all on her own. Actually loaned Mr. Hearst $1 billion during the Depression. She was really good at Monopoly. For a reason. For real. Yeah, she was good at the game and in real life, of property management. So she actually kind of took care of herself in that way. So, I was reading today, in her book, saying that she had bought certain properties in New York on different blocks and was generating around $600,000 a year in rental income from those properties.
Famous miners like the Aquitania and Europa report giant seas which have crippled many a smaller vessel, and distress signals from helpless paths are keeping them.
Of buying goods of American manufacture rather than materials of foreign manufacture is not only a patriotic policy for the general good of the nation, but a policy which will surely inure to our own benefit. Prosperity depends upon the purchasing power of the community. And the purchasing power of the community depends mainly upon the distribution of wealth in wages. When we buy American goods, we give employment to American labor and a legitimate profit to American industry. That is what makes general prosperity. And each and every one of us is dependent for his prosperity upon the general prosperity. Therefore, let us, at this new year, resolve to make it a policy for 1933 to buy American goods and to give work to American labor and to distribute wealth in wages and so create and revive the prosperity which we so lately enjoy.
It's spectacular. This place.
You want to do the garden tour? Oh, I did the garden tour a few years back, and they tell you why this particular flower. There's a tree out here that's not indigenous to the area, and Mr. Hearst wanted everything to be indigenous to the area. And this gardener was so afraid he was going to be fired because he planted it. He went with his head bowed and his...
We're not gold, so we don't take very big steps.
I need to tie my shoe off. This one is like...
Is it loose?
Oh yeah.
Where else can you swim in the Milky Way and walk on gold? This is a Wesleyan cantata in Enchanted Hill, where a castle floats in the clouds above us. Think about Glenn Miller's famous song, Moonlight Serenade, as you're bathing in the waters below. This is not heaven, but some say you can see it from here. On behalf of the California State Park System,